Hey, this is Osman. I wanted to share a story about two of the best weeks of my life. I grew up inside a busy city in England and had very little interaction with nature. The closest I got to growing something myself was when I bought a grass head from the nearby cash and carry warehouse, which died after growing about an inch of grass of hair, and then its whole face turned dark and mouldy because I watered it too much. I really had no understanding of how food is made, other than sometimes being told by my mom to buy onions, garlic, green chilies, tomatoes and some boneless chicken from the local grocery store, and watch my mum transform that into a Pakistani curry. As an adult, I moved to King's Cross in London, and lived next to the busiest train station in the city. I was working as a barrister in human rights, which meant I had a stressful, busy and unpredictable lifestyle, and rarely had time to cook my own meals. My diet consisted of takeaway pizzas, burgers, chips, pasta that already had the ingredients inside that you just had to boil up a little, and the occasional salad if my body started hurting. At the age of 33, I felt exhausted from that lifestyle, and I moved to Geneva in Switzerland, hoping for a quieter and more peaceful life. Although things definitely slowed down, my lifestyle remained very similar, and I began to feel that I was missing something fundamental. I wanted to go out into the country and really understand the origins of how food is actually made, where it comes from, and what it takes to produce wholesome, fresh and sustainable meat in agriculture. But I also wanted to experience a different way of living, one that isn't based on fast and wasteful consumption, but to be more in sync with nature and learn how my grandparents and all the generations before them had lived. I heard about WWOOFING, which stands for Worldwide Opportunities in Organic Farming. The idea is that there are thousands of organic farms all around the world, pretty much in every country, where the hosts offer free food and accommodation in exchange for your labor and assistance at the farm. There's no money exchanged. It's based on reciprocity and provides people like me with a genuine opportunity to learn about organic farming techniques. I created my online profile and was thrilled when a nearby farm told me that they'd be happy to receive me for a 2-week placement. When the day arrived, I was excited and nervous. Nervous because I had 10 years of experience as a lawyer and absolutely no practical skills or knowledge of organic farming. I was scared that my hosts would be disappointed by their choice and regret inviting me. When I got off the bus, I was immediately greeted by this epic, open and beautiful countryside, and it already felt like I'd entered a different universe. A few minutes walk and I arrived at the farm. I was given a huge welcome by the hosts, whose generosity was overwhelming. It was obvious from the beginning that they were driven by an ethic of true sustainable living, respect for nature, and kindness towards all. Due to the COVID-19 situation, we had to make sure we maintained some physical distance, but this didn't prevent them from guiding me, teaching me, and making me feel welcome all throughout my stay. I was shown the room where I would be living, a small but perfectly adapted little space, a bit like a hobbit hole, with a bed, desk, little armchair, a wood burner, which I was too afraid to use, an electric heater, and a nice window looking out onto the field. I felt that this new home would be a place to rest and meditate, to escape from my chaotic and excessive tendencies in the city, and immerse myself in farm life. There were already a couple of ducks and geese on my windowsill, taking a gander in my bedroom, wondering who their new neighbour was. Pun intended. The room was based inside a huge barn shed, which in French is called a hangar, which was a gigantic space to work, filled with tools and resources to suit life on a farm. The farm dog smelled my presence and galloped over to check whether I was a goodie or a baddie. After settling in, I looked out my window to see my first sunset over the farm, and was overcome with a tremendous sense of peace and contentment. I felt that this place was exactly where I wanted to be. My work on the farm started the next morning. Work began at 8. To kick off, I had to feed the chickens, ducks and geese every morning. It was wonderfully chaotic. They were ravenous for grain every morning, and their noisy energy served better than any alarm clock I've ever had to get the day started. 2 mama ducks had just given birth to these insanely cute little ducklings, who would waddle over to me each morning to get their fill. And after being fed, all the birds were free to roam around under the sun all day in search of little worms to chew on and generally shit all over the place. The farm had around 20 sheep, who are the ultimate chillers. It seemed they did nothing but walk around and eat all day, except one or two who are actually more rebellious than you might think sheep are capable of. They have to be penned in with an electric fence, and one of my jobs was to help move the fencing to make sure the sheep were moved to pastures with plenty of grass to munch on. When the new fence is set up, we have to persuade them over to their new field. Just a little bit of delicious grain in a bucket would do the trick. Give one of them the scent, and they all follow the leader. Another one of my jobs was to look after the herb and salad garden inside a tunnel to moderate the moisture and the temperature, and this meant going over their beds to pluck out all the tiny little weeds and make sure they had enough water. Over the 2 weeks, I saw these grow from tiny leaves to fully grown salads ready to harvest. I also helped to prepare some geraniums, take them out their pots and move them into flower beds. One little thing I learned is that it's good to pluck off the actual flowers when you transfer them, because the flowers take up a lot of the plant's energy and prevent them from flourishing in the new beds. But after plucking off so many flowers, I was able to collect some of them and put them in my bedroom. I was never much into flowers, but it was a definitely pretty sweet thing to have them in my room. One of the main things I did was using this medieval weapon to remove some serious weeds from the meadows. The weeds are called rumex, and their roots go down a couple of feet. Other farms use harmful pesticides to kill them, but organic farming often means being old school and doing hard labour to get rid of them. It started out quite fun, but after a few hours of work in the rain, I ended up going a little nuts. But I think over the 2 weeks I collected quite a lot of them and started to feel like a bit of a rumex legend after throwing all of them on the farm's burn pile. Other tasks can include stacking wood piles. The farm had a gigantic wood burner to keep the entire property warm. But my favourite moment was mowing the lawn on this thing. It felt like playing real-life Mario Kart, with the bonus of actually being helpful and productive. In my second week, it rained a lot, so I was taught how to use this machine to sand down the wooden chairs. Turns out that these masks are not just useful for stopping coronavirus. Painting the chairs after sanding them was a rewarding and meditative process, and I listened to a good 4 or 5 chapters of Lord of the Rings on audiobook while doing it. This was a chicken from the farm. I promised my host to make them a Pakistani curry, and they handed me a whole chicken. I was too embarrassed to admit that I have no idea how to cut one of these things, but a helpful YouTube video and a call to my mum showed me how it's done, and I pulled off a pretty spectacular dinner. Apart from the farm chicken curry, I was eating incredibly fresh and wholesome food, like this pasta, which has pesto made from basil from the farm, and I added chopped horseradishes and spinach leaves, which I literally plucked out the ground a few minutes before I ate them. The difference between this and the stuff I was eating in London is like night and day. Life on the farm wasn't always easy. In fact, it was generally very hard and back-breaking work. It rained a lot while I was there, and shoveling hay, taking out weeds, and sanding chairs was engaging muscles that I've rarely ever used. I would go back to my room most evenings caked in mud, but the hard work always felt good, and being able to see the fruit of my labour was so rewarding compared to the office work I'd been doing in London. I was also able to go for long walks, which I used as a time to meditate and reflect. Being surrounded by open green spaces and sometimes seeing an infinite blue sky above was incredibly healing. I spent a lot of time sitting alone on this bench, and began to understand that the thousands of thoughts, anxieties and pressures that had been racing through my mind were entirely unnecessary. I began to confront these difficult inner feelings, and by confronting them, realized that they went away, and what remained underneath was a feeling of peace. This experience made me feel a million miles away from my aggressive and busy life in London. I felt like I was going back to basics, connecting with nature, and realizing that life can be enjoyed one moment at a time by learning to let go. In fact, it felt like that was the only way to enjoy it. This 2-week placement taught me so much and transformed me in ways that are continuing to unfold. But most fundamentally, it showed me that there are alternative ways to live, and that there is so much to learn from reconnecting with nature and finding sustainable ways to live with our environment. I really recommend trying this woofing experience to anyone watching. Thank you for listening.